Ba. In this video, we are going to be talking about functions. Now, functions are an important part of programming. In the last class, if you have been following this consequentially, I mentioned some functions like print, whose task is to display something to the terminal. We have input function that allows you take data or information from the user. We have the int that allows you to convert a string into an integer, and an str, which is for string, that also converts an integer into a string. Now, what we are going to be looking at in this video or lesson is, now, how do functions work? What are the limits and what are the capabilities of functions? And how can you write your own function as well? So we said, let's say something like score equals to 2. All right. And then let's say second score, for example. So let's make this one the first score. Let's say this one is the first score, and the second score, let's say this is equals to, let's say 4. And then I want to print, let's print our first score plus second score. All right. So let us run this one over here. Enter. Now we can see it's 24. Why? Because 2 and 4, they are wrapped in double quotes, and now they are what? They are strings, not integers. So that means we can convert this one into integers by wrapping them inside our int function, and also do the same thing for our second score, and then we have this. So if I save this, so instead of concatenation, concatenating first score and second score, we run this, it now gives us 6. Now it gives us the mathematical results. So we can as well do the same thing right from here. We can say int, and then wrap this one inside the int, and then as well we can also wrap this one as well and say let's say int, and then let's get this one out. Oh, okay. So let's get this one out, and okay. So when you run this, it also gives you 6 as well. So the int here is a function. Print also is a function. So the function, the task of int is to what? Convert that string into an integer. So we can also write our own functions ourselves. Now, I also mentioned replace in the last class that takes an argument. Even more than, it takes 2 arguments at least, and it can even take up to what? Up to 3 arguments. So how are these functions written, and how can you write your own functions as well? So let me draw a little bit of limitation over here. So let's say we want to ask the user for their score, and then let's say, okay, let's just ask maybe someone who is a tutor or something, and then let's say something like so let's convert this one to integer straight out, and then let's say enter score, right? And then we now want to print, okay, we want to say the total score, or let's say something like final score equals to, let us subtract that from 100 and then score. All right, so I want to print, and then let me just print the final score. The final score. All right, so if I come over here and I run this, now it is asking me for a score, well, 57. Now we can see the final score is what? 43. But now I don't really want to start doing this over here, 100 minus score. I have called this function, int function, to do what? To convert the string the user provides, to convert it into an integer. But I want to write my own function that is not going to be int. It is going to be a get score function, and the job of that function would be to take in an integer or to take in a string or whatever, and then it converts that string or that input into an integer and then subtract it from 100. So I'm going to make an improvement to Python's inbuilt int function. So now what I can do over here, I can do something like this. I can write a function. So to write your own function, you are going to start with def. And def in this context would mean define. So you are defining the function, declaring the function, stating the function. And then every function for the scope of this lecture has its own name. And then we can call this one, let's say, get score. So I'm going to have a parenthesis. And now that is where we determine whether it is going to have an argument or not. And then here, I'm going to say n because I want it to take a number as an argument. It can be anything. I can write A, I can write B, but I'm saying n so that it takes what? N, or a number as an argument. And then I'm having this colon. Now when I press enter now, you can see that from here we have 4 spaces. Here we have 4 spaces. Okay, if I press tab, it gives me that that space. So now this space after this colon here, after the H here, is what we call indentation. All right, so and this tells you that everything that is under this colon here, they are all part of this what? Of this get score function. So there is properties. And I want to say something like final score should now be equals to 100 minus the int of n, and then I want to return final score, and I'm going to explain return to you. So now this is a function called get score. It is a function that takes a number as an argument, the same way integer that takes anything. It could be a number, it could be a string, but at least it must be in the number format. It takes a number as an argument. It tries to convert the number into an integer, even if it's 2 with a double quote, and then it subtracts it from 100. So here I can just say print score instead of final score. Here I can ask to print score, but instead of the int function, I am now going to call our get score function. So a function only works when it is called. So on line 5, I have called our get score function on whatever the user wants to input. So whatever the user inputs will become the value of what? Of 5. So imagine I am not even using this input first. Let me just say something like, let me say 57, or let me just say 59. That is the number. So our get score, we convert this one into an integer, and then it will now also subtract that integer, that number, from 100. And then if I run this, we can now see 41. So let us also do this. Imagine we are asking the user for a number. Now see, I am not asking, I'm not using Python's built-in function. I am using my own function that I've written. Now my own function now seems to have improved the capabilities of what? Of the Python's inbuilt function. So my get score function is not just converting a number or a value into an integer. It is also subtracting that integer from 100. So let's do this. So let's say 30, and then we can now see 70. But then I can also write another function. I can call this one, I can just call this one great. And then it is not going to take any argument. And then I can just say print, let me just say something like welcome student, or welcome new user. Let's do that. All right, so we are asking this greet function that anytime we call the function, it should print welcome new user. And then as you can see here, it does not take any argument. It has no value inside its parentheses. So that means anytime I call it, I am not going to pass in anything inside. So let me just delete all of this one. And then I told you a function only works when you call the function. Now let me call just only the greet function, and then I'm going to have the parentheses. You must always make sure you don't miss out on that when you are calling the what? When you are calling the function. So great. If I run this one, it tells me welcome new user. Now get score did nothing simply because I did not call get score. Well, I can call greet, and then I can now also say, now look at this, let me say get score, and then let me now pass in something like 10. All right, so let me run this, but it still tells me welcome new user. But get score should have converted 10 into an integer and what, and also subtract it from what, from 100. But it's not doing that. But let me now do something very interesting where I want to focus. Let me now say print, and then let me now do this. Now it works. It tells me 90. But why do I need to print for get score to display something to the terminal, and I did not need to print for greet to work? Now that is where this becomes very interesting. So there's a difference between when you ask a function to print and when you ask a function to return something. When a function returns a value, that value is reusable. But when you ask a value to print, it only displays that thing to the terminal. So let me now give you a very interesting example. I'm going to copy this our get score function, and then let me just take all these ones down. Let me take these ones away. Ctrl V. All right. So now instead of get score, let's just say test score. Let's call this one test score, for example. All right. So instead of saying this one should return, I'm going to ask it to do what? To print final score. Now, what is the difference between these two codes, between these two functions? On line 3, we are returning final score. On line 7, we are printing final score. Now, let me now show you something that makes sense over here. Let me now say something like, okay, let's see. All right, so let's say first user, let's say the first user, okay, let's say it should be, their own should be something like get score, and then let's call this one, let's say it is 5. So let me show you what is interesting over here. Let me also say second user, and then let me also say test score, and then let me also say 5. All right, so now let me run this, of course. So this one gives us 95. It is line 10 that prints, not first user. But now this is not very interesting. Let me now say first user total, or let me say first user addition. Let us add 5 addition. Okay, so let us add 5 to this user score. So let me say equals to first user, let me say plus 5. All right, and then let me print, let me use my f string, and then let me say first user, and then let me say should be what, first user addition. All right, and then that's one. So for second user, let us also do the same thing, but I'm going to say second user addition. All right, addition. So let it be second user plus 5, and then let me print, let me say f string, let me say second user should be second user addition. All right, now let us see what's going to happen over here. Now I have two functions, our get score and our total score. So on line 9, I say first user should be get score 5. We are calling our get score function on 5, right? And then first user addition. So if 5 minus 100, 100 minus 5 gives us 95. So first user will become 95, right? So first user addition equals to first user plus 5. So I am sure that should give us what? 100. And I'm also thinking second user too should give us 100 as well. But let me run this one. Now you can now see the first user gives us what? 100, but we have a value coming from 95, and then we also have unsupported operand type s for non-type and int. Now, what does that mean? That means on line 11, first user addition gives us 100. Why? Because we ask this function to return. So when you ask a function to return, you can reuse the value that it gives you. But if a function is printing, it only displays that print into the terminal. It does not hand you a value. So that means what getScore did over here was getScore here now. So this one became 95. This one became 95. And then, so first user addition became 95 plus what? 95 plus 5. But here, this one is not returning. The function, this second score function, only this test score function only returns. So, but it only prints, it does not return. So the only thing it returns is none. None here means no value. So that means we are literally saying second user equals to addition equals to none plus what? Plus 5. That's why it tells us for non-type and what? An int, that we can't add none to 5. Let me also make this much more simpler for you. Let me say something like user score equals to, let me use our get score that returns get score, right? And then let me say 20, and then let me now pass user score, which should now be 80. 100 minus 20, let me now say new score, for example, equals to user score, and then let me now print new score. All right, so when I do this, let's see what happens. You can see it's 80. User score equals to get score. I got 20 on it. That is 100 minus 20. So 80. I can now reuse the value because the function was returning. I can reuse the value and associate it or attribute it to another variable called new score. So when I printed new score, the value of new score became what? 80. But then if I use our test score, because it is not returning any value, it's only printing, it will only display this final score to the terminal, but it is not going to be what? To be reusable. Let me do this. You can now see it printed 80. Line 7, because of line 7, it printed 80, but score is none. So that means this one, this user score was what? None. It did not return any value because the function does not return. But then if I do something like this and I say print final score, and it should also return the final score. Now you can see that if I run this now, I will have 80 in two places, because not only does it print, it also does what? It also does return. Now let me also now quickly show you something else before we go further into functions. Now Python works from top to bottom. Python works from top to bottom. It treats your code from the top and then comes what? Comes straight down. Now what I'm referring to over here is that let's get off our test score, and then let's also leave our, okay, let's have our get score over here. So if I say score equals to input, all right, okay, if I say input and then I say enter score, right, and then I want to print the score, and then let's call our get score over here. All right, so that this is only working. Let's do this. This is only 67. Now this works. This is working because Python was able to read get score first before we use it in line 7. But now if I take on my get score and then I now put it under here, let's do this. So let's run this, and now we have an error. It says name get score is not defined, and that's because before Python even got to see that we have a function called get score, before it hit the logic of that get score function, it's already trying to make use of that function, and then it tells us get score is not defined. But it is not efficient that every time we want to write functions, we are going to write them at the top of our codes. I mean, it can be a little bit because you can't just start your program and then you start writing codes at the bottom at every point in time. So now, what programmers do is we always have the main logic. So the functions are there, but the main logic itself is also what is also there, and that is where I'm going to introduce you to the what to the main function. And then inside, since it is here that I am using our getScore function, I can as well just write something like this: def. The name of the main function will be main. It's not taking any arguments here, and then all this one we can ask them to be properties of the what of the main function. And now if we do this, let's now do this. Okay, so let's say okay, let's see. All right, so fine. So now this itself, I was trying to run the code and now it is not running. Now why is it not running? In the beginning of this class, I said that a function will not work unless it is called. Now I have declared main, but main has not been called anywhere. And if main is not called, there's no way the logic that has been implemented inside the block of main would work. So I can come over here and then I will just call what? I will call main at the top, at the bottom of the code. So if I run this now, enter score 69, and then you can now see 31. So I can begin to write several other codes underneath, and I'm going to what? To use them in my what? In my main function when it be. So why don't we now talk about functions taking more than one argument and even yes, multiple arguments. Why don't we call this our function now? Let's declare another function. Let's call this one def. Let's call it add_score, or let me say maybe add_score or add2, or let's say sum, but let's call this add2. And then I'm going to add, now DNA is now two arguments, a and b. So these are just parameters. So when you pass in the value for these parameters, then they become arguments. And then I have our colon, and then I just want to say return the int of a plus the int of b. Return the int of a plus the int of b. So that means this argument is expecting this function is expecting two arguments, a and b. So we call this positional argument. These a and b are just mere placeholders. I can call them x and y. So now here in my main function, well, I can just say something like maybe let's say something like result, and then let me just call this function r2. Let me pass two numbers. Let me call it 6 and 9, and then let me do print what? Print results. All right, if I do this and let's run this one now, we have what? 6 plus 9, which is 15. So I have written a code that does addition. So that means if you don't know, let's say our add_score, our add2 is something just at the bottom of our code. Now we are only saying add2 here. So that means there is somewhere I have written my add2 function. So instead of me saying 6 plus 9 or and all that, I only call our add2 function, and then I pass in what? These two arguments, and then they get what? They get summed. All right, so that's that. So we can also do several other things. Let me bring this one back. So and then we can also even do several other one. So we can say, we can just call this one calculator maybe, and then this calculator will even ask you to even take, let's say maybe something like 3 arguments, a, b, c, and then we can ask it that, you know what, why don't you take the int of a plus the int of b, and then let's say multiplied by what? The int of what? Of c. So now that means this is going to be taking how many arguments? 3 arguments. And then I can call this one calculator back. I'm calling our calculator function. Now, but what happens if I pass in 2 arguments? If I pass in 2 arguments, it gives me an error. It says calculator is missing one required positional argument, which is what? Which is c. So that means it is expecting 3 arguments to fill in those parameters, but I'm passing it 2. So what is going to be the value of c? Now I can also now do something like this. Let's say for All right, or let me just make this simpler. Let's say 2, and then let's say 2 again. All right, so now let me run this. Now we have 10. Now how does that work? The int of a plus the int of b multiplied by the int of c. A plus b, that is going to be 6 plus 2, that is 10. And then 10 multiplied by 2, that should be 20. But it 6 times 2 should be 6 plus 2 should be 8. And then 8 times 2 should give us 16. But we are getting 10. Why are we getting 10? Now we are getting 10 simply because even Python follows the rule of mathematics. So what it does is Python did 2 multiplied by 2, which is 4, and then 6 plus that's 4 to make what? 10. B is 2, C is 2. So Python prioritized multiplication first, which is 2 multiplied by 2, and then followed by addition, which is now what? The int of A plus the result of B and C. But if you want to make sure that we want A and B to work together, and then we want to exclude or isolate C. Now we can now do like this. I can add both A and B inside bracket, which means I am now grouping them. A and B are now in a group, and C is now a what? A different group. So if I now do this, you can now say 16. So it's understood that A and B, they are a group. By using this parenthesis, they are a group, and then it differentiated it from what? From C. But let's go back to the problem we encountered before when we did this. When we did this, we saw that it says calculator was missing one required argument. So you can also set a default value. Now let's say we can say C. Let me say C is probably, let's say 2 over here now. All right, so let's do this. Now you can now see it's giving us what? It's giving us 10. All right, why is that? Because I have said C equals to 2, so that means whether or not C, a value was passed into C, C is still going to have that default value, which is what? 2. So C here now becomes optional. So but if you don't put in C, that means 2 is going to be the automatic value of C. So you can just think of something like replace. Like I said, something like let's say maybe dot replace. I mentioned that the other time in the other lecture, and I said it takes an argument, 2 arguments. It can be A, replace A with B, right? So now the third argument is an integer, which is optional. So that means if I say 2, it is going to look for everywhere there is A, replace it with B twice. But if I write nothing, it is going to replace every instance of what? A with B, because that is the default value of what? The default value of the third argument. All right, so we can do that. We can set default argument for every one of what? Of this parameters. Now another thing you must also know, which we've done anyway, is some functions do not even return, and they don't even take argument at all. So we can say, maybe we can even write another function, and then we can say, let's say def. You can say let's say something like okay, just you can do anything. So like we did that one before, we can say greeter, and then so it's just going to greet, right? We can say print, and then let's say hello, right? So if we do this, you see, okay, we are not calling it here, so let's call this greeter, and then let's say, all right. So when I do this, it tells us what? Hello. Another thing I can even do with this, I can ask you to take an argument, which is the name of the user. It can be n to signify user, and then let me put our f string over here, and then I can ask it to do or to print hello n, right? So anytime I want to call this function, let me just say something like let me say Bashir, enter, and then when I run this now, it tells us hello Bashir. And if I don't even want to do that, I can also just do something like this. I can say something like okay, here we may just ask it to just return, which will be smarter. So it should return the hello and then we can ask the user for their name, and then equals to input, or we can call the function, even write on it, we can call this one greeter, and then we can say input, so name. Okay, we can say input and then say what is your name. So when we do that, and then we print the what, the name. So if I come over here and do this, what is your name? Let's say Bashir. Hello Bashir. Let's say James. Hello James. So that's going to be everything now for this functions class. It's very important that you keep practicing with with functions, and the more you practice, the better you get when it comes to functions. See you in the next video.